The Kellen and Alex Show.
0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
The Kellen and Alex Show. Dr. Breuninger, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having
Welcome
me.
back to the
Thanks.
podcast.
Yeah. It was a magical experience the first time.
Just had to come back for
had to
part
come
two.
back.
Jocelyn, thank you for co-hosting.
Yeah, of course.
So the topic, COVID and mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good topic.
So
Tough topic.
yeah, I mean, there's so many different. Okay, so maybe we could start with this. I've been thinking about like when people bring up mental health, oftentimes it's after mental health has kind of been like a certain person's mental health has already gone downhill, or like a community's mental health, and it's kind of like retroactive.
Yeah.
Oh, let's start talking about mental health now that a lot of people are depressed.
Yeah, right.
But none of it's like preemptive. Hey, this could actually really harm people's mental health.
Yeah.
Why aren't we focusing on it first?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think some folks have sort of recognized that a similar trend or commentary or something like this. But yeah, that to me seems to be a problem. There's a whole field in psychology, right, called positive psychology that starts to get at some of this stuff. You know, Martin Seligman. I think the story is maybe this is sort of hagiography, but the story is something like he was out gardening once, and his young daughter was like, "Hey, Dad, in your field, why do you guys always focus on what's wrong with people and never on like what's right with people, their strengths?" So this got him thinking about, hey, we because by the way, you know, mental health isn't just the absence of sort of mental suffering or mental illness. Just because you don't have anxiety or depression doesn't mean you're flourishing, right? And so Seligman got thinking sort of about what helps people flourish. And so there is a vein of positive psychology that sort of says, look, apart from sort of mental illness or deficits, we should be focusing on what helps people flourish: gratitude, kindness, meaning, positive emotions, engagement, relationships. So there is this sort of research program out there that has been at play for 20 years now or more, that looks at this stuff. But you're right that in national conversations, we tend not to think about mental health until we're already well into the problem. And that does seem to be indicative of a problem in my mind, that we don't really build society up in a way where we think, how do we best structure society to help people flourish psychologically? We sort of only after the fact think, oh no, something's happened. What can we do to dig ourselves out of this mental health hole? Right.
A lot of people are depressed.
Yeah,
what do we do now?
Right.
Not what. How did a lot of people get depressed? You know,
exactly. Yeah. That's right. And I think, again, one thing that's really helpful to think about in all of these debates about mental health or discussions about mental health is this stuff is almost always multivariable or multivariate. It's very, very rarely can you give a sort of one-to-one correlation to these things. So-and-so's depressed because of X, or, anxiety has arisen because of Y. There's always multiple factors that contribute. And so oftentimes they're weighted. Some factors contribute more than others. But it's sort of a naive view to think that there's sort of one thing that causes anxiety or depression.
Right.
It's always a conglomerate of factors.
So maybe one of those, let's get to the COVID factors.
Yeah, sure.
So the idea of social distancing, which became kind of like a watchword pretty rapidly when COVID started coming about. It was masks and social distancing, which are two of the, what are your thoughts on, let's say, the concept itself, its application during COVID times?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, so full disclosure, I've not thought a ton about these topics. So I'm sort of spitballing here. So if I say anything that's like abhorrent or wrong, that's
just
my
Kellen and Alex. This is going out millions of people.
Jordan Peterson, right?
That's right.
Okay. So generally speaking, I don't have a problem with the idea of social distancing per se. I mean, and it seems like even in a lot of ways, the thing that sort of best predicts a reduction in the spread of COVID is social distancing, even above and beyond masks. At least that's sort of what I've seen. A fair amount of things that have said, like, if you can social distance, it's even more effective than mask wearing. So fine. What's the problem with social distancing? I guess it depends. I mean, here's the strange thing about social distancing that I'm surprised a little bit that it has bothered people as much as it has. Not because I don't see the value in relationships or know the importance of relationships and mental health, but because so much of what we do already is sort of pseudo relationships or radically socially distanced anyway. I mean, it seems to me most people's relationships take place on social media platforms, Instagram, Snapchat. There's a great book by called iGen, and then there's a big long thing, like how today's generation is disconnected, that's anxious, depressed, blah blah blah. But the point that's made in this book is that today, most young adults between the age or teenagers between the age of like 14 and 18, they spend a lot more time alone in their rooms, and they're a lot less social naturally. So you guys are less likely to get your driver's license at the age of 16. You're actually less likely to engage in premarital sex. You're less likely to get a job in high school. These are all things, by the way, which require you to leave your house and go interact with people. I mean, the benefit, we think to ourselves sort of as Catholics, like, wow, it's great. Like numbers of premarital sex are down. But it's because people aren't going to places where they can encounter each other in that way even. I mean, it's the fruit of a negative thing rather than a positive thing. And so part of what has baffled me about this whole thing is that so many people actually spend so much of their time in their room texting or Snapchatting, or I think we didn't realize how close we already were to the precipice. We were already socially distanced.
And COVID just accelerated that.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of like, I'm
we're spitballing it.
I'm spitballing here, but
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think
it does.
this is COVID. COVID was the push over the edge, but we were standing on the edge.
Right.
If COVID happens, I don't know, 25 years ago, does it have the same social impact? I'm not sure. Would it have a social impact? Yeah, of course it would. But does it have the same social impact and the same, negative effect on our mental health? I think maybe not. Given that we're already so distanced because of the technology we have.
That is true. But I guess the question I have is like, I definitely have noticed that. But I mean, growing up in my life, I'm a very extroverted person and I love to be with people and whatnot. And like, I don't know if it's just a Catholic thing or if it was a homeschooling thing, but like I was always around people, whether it was my family, whether it was whatever else. And so like, what would you say in like that sort of community where like, because obviously like, and as Catholics, we really believe this, in our faith and everything, but like relationships, we're created for relationships. And like, obviously there's the relationships we have via, social media, but realistically, like whether it's at church or whether it's youth groups or, different things we're involved in, like, I mean, most students, they still have to go to school, and like COVID's impacted that obviously, but like, you have your bands, you have your, clubs and stuff like that. So there still is a sense of like community. So now like COVID's kind of like, the isolation and stuff like that.
For
like,
sure.
What are your thoughts like on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, okay, so you're right to note that certainly different communities have sort of different, how to say this, the emphasis on in-person relationships varies within different ethnicities, different socioeconomic statuses, different sort of cultures and organizations. And so I think you're right that Catholics oftentimes put sort of high price on this sort of thing. It's highly valued. So you might still see more of the in-person relationships in the Catholic community than you would in other communities. But even still, I mean, like little things like when I was growing up, going to the mall, like people hung out at the mall. The mall was a place you went to hang out.
When I was a kid, too.
Yeah, which is like
same.
today, like nobody hangs out at the mall.
It's crazy. Yeah,
it's like crazy. So where do people go to hang out? You're like, I don't
nowhere.
know, nowhere. Like they don't. Like
we had like it was a skating rink like in our local town and a bowling alley. Dude, everyone was there all the time. That was when I was in middle school.
Dude, Saturday night,
even from middle school to high school.
Yes,
that all changed. Very rapidly.
Very rapidly. And so to your point, I mean, so again, to reiterate, I kind of think we were on life support already. I think we were we were barely having our sort of needs fed by these little tastes that were just like keeping us from utterly falling apart. But it wasn't as robust as it could or should be. But to your point, I do think certain communities probably noticed it more, given that they had a higher emphasis on already on in-person interaction. But I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like there's been also varying degrees of talking about, like, so I don't have to social distance from my nuclear family. It's not like my wife and I are yelling at each other from across the house, like, babe, I wish I could hold your hand. But like, I mean, I don't know. It's, I think, you know, again, I haven't, but I'm pretty sure the recommendations were like, try to stay with your sort of circle. Everyone should have these circles, and you sort of, those are the people you don't socially distance from, but then other people you do.
And you really find out if you like your family or not through the lockdowns. I do wonder. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, going off of that, it's like there's all of these, like, I've heard so much, like, especially over this past summer, like, because of the whole quarantine and having to be isolated and stuff like that, like, there's so many, and I mean, this is my other question, but to step on this first is like, there's so many toxic families. There's so many, like,
right. I do. Okay. So I think this is a problem. I think part of the problem with quarantine, that, and I'm pretty sure I've read stuff that has shown that things like domestic violence rates have gone up because you're forcing people to live in these toxic environments with you. So normally when maybe somebody could get out of the house a bit more, they're stuck with abusers, and so you're seeing higher rates of these things. But I mean, see, this is the strange thing a little bit about social distancing to me. I mean, so quarantine and social distance are different, right? I mean, social distancing is just stay 6 feet away from somebody. But I can have a vibrant, look, by the way, whenever I go over my friend's house, right? Like I'm over Dr. Plato's house or Dom's house. I mean, at Plato's house, we're sitting across the living room. We're not sitting on each other's laps here. So like social distancing wasn't a hardship in our friendship, you know? Like, hey, hey buddy, we need to be on separate couches. This is not like a weird thing. Like we're not sitting in close proximity to one another all the time anyway.
It's just like a personal space bubble that, like, I feel like it's already there.
Americans really value this person. We're not like, you know, in other cultures that are much more touchy, Italians and Central Americans, or Venezuelans, Colombians, they're like, they're on
Kellen Lake, you know? He's all the time slapping.
Slapping, touching, hugging, rubbing. It's like,
Kellen.
But these are like, you don't, most of us tend not to be this way. So it's strange to me that people have talked about social distancing as such a problem. Look, when I go to Harbor Freight to buy a tool, and they've got a barrier between me and the cashier that keeps us 6 feet apart. I'm not like reaching out yearning for human connection. Like you're right there. You're just 6 feet away. I say the same things. Hey, what's up, man? How you doing? Good. How's your day? Good. Hey, no, I don't want the insurance plan. It's not like I normally touch the cashier at Harbor Freight and now I'm stopped from it. So to me, the social distancing isn't as much of a problem as maybe the quarantining. I don't know.
And maybe another problem with,
I kind of like when somebody's not on my back at the Kroger. Totally. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
what may be more controversial than just the social distancing, the masks. The masks. I think that has become like the symbolic.
Oh, hasn't it, man?
And so that is the more controversial of the social.
Much more.
But they do go together. I think when people talk about it, it's mask, it's social distancing. Why do you think masks have become like the symbolic, I'm on the side of COVID, or I think it's a hoax, or whatever? Like, what is it about
it's
wearing a mask?
It's interesting. So I think probably, and this is, again, I was going to say this every 10 to 15 seconds. I'm spitballing here, right? I'm thinking on my feet, which can be dangerous. So I suspect what it is something like mask mandates came down from the government. And so what masks quickly became a proxy for was your views on government. Does government have a legitimate authority to mandate things to us? Does government have a majority to try to sort of dictate how we should live our lives? Or do I think government shouldn't? Do I think government should be hands off, let me decide? Sort of, free market, free enterprise, stay out, just, as little government intervention as possible. And so when the government mandated masks, when you saw governors handing down mask mandates, declaring states of emergency to hand down mask mandates, it quickly became, if you wore a mask, that meant that now, very frequently it's associated with sort of being a Democrat. Government intervention is fine. We want the government's help. If you didn't wear it, you're probably a conservative, a Republican. We want government to stay out of our business. Don't tread on me, this sort of thing, right? So I think it was the way it was handed down because it was a government mandate.
Okay.
It quickly became a political issue.
Oh, definitely.
And now Catholics have, I think, unfortunately done two things maybe. One is, not two things. One thing, I think Catholics have just fallen into this sort of political trap. This is my great critique of most of Catholicism, is that even as Catholics, we tend to view the world first and foremost through a political lens. And that seems deeply problematic to me. The Catholic Church is sort of almost, at least in the circles we roll in, it's uniquely identified with the Republican Party, conservatism. And sometimes the lines get really blurry of sort of what is Catholic doctrine and dogma that I need to be following, and what is Republican Party platform.
And just becomes identical in some ways.
They become identical in some ways. And I do think that's super problematic, because I think I think a real Catholic should be utterly confounding to both their friends who are Democrats and their friends that are Republicans. I think a real Catholic is somebody who says something like, look, we need to address how we deal with, we need to address in a compassionate and charitable way how we deal with immigrants and immigration, right? And the Republicans are like, what are you talking about, man? We need to close them borders. And to the Democrats, they need to say, look, we need to find compassionate ways to end abortion, in which we help women, but recognize the dignity of the unborn child. And so their Democratic friends are like, what? You hate women's? We should be utterly like an utter confound. We should be baffling to our political friends, because we should defy sort of being able to being put into sort of neat boxes. I think that's my take.
Hopefully this new polity conference will be baffling to a lot of people.
How about it? Yeah.
I don't know if you're planning on going to some of the talks, but
so it's very interesting. A lot of friends and colleagues are participating. I have to put in a new floor in my house, so I'll be doing the.
Casual.
You'll be baffled with how to do.
I'll
the
be baffled in a totally different way, right?
I tell you, it's a tough time.
It is tough, but
it does become. Yeah, like a political icon. Oh, you're wearing a mask. Oh, well, you're with them.
Right.
You're not with us.
You're not with us, right? And I feel this. I mean, the church we go to, we tend to go to like the more, say like liturgically conservative church. And I think in some ways it's become like the anti-mask church. And my family always goes and wears masks. And I'll tell you why we wear masks there. We wear masks because there's a sign on the door that says that the state of Ohio has asked that you wear masks. And that sign was put up by our priest. And I have a sense that
in virtuous obedience, which is our motion for this weekend, actually.
Oh, nice.
Wearing a mask is a virtuous form or act of obedience.
I think to a legitimate authority, I think it is. Look, St. Thomas has this idea that he spells out, where even if somebody lays down a silly or foolish law, if a legitimate authority lays down a silly or foolish law, so long as it isn't immoral, it's not intrinsically immoral. Or not a grave evil. If it's foolish, silly, even sort of wrong-minded, they could be wrong about it, but it's not sort of a grave moral issue, then following that is an act of obedience. And it grows you spiritually. That a legitimate authority who lays down a rule, even if it, look at Padre Pio. I mean, here's a guy who was told by his bishop he couldn't celebrate mass publicly, he couldn't hear confessions, he couldn't, right? This guy's got this stigmata. He's like, he's undoubtedly the holiest guy in the room, right? Like, right, like, but he listens. What he could have done is he could have said, look, you're wrong. This is like, everything I'm doing is legitimate.
Yeah.
I'm an obedient, right? I'm not a problem here. This is a silly, foolish, the bishop was wrong, right? Like, totally. You're wrong. So I'm going to push back. But instead he obeyed. And because he obeyed, he grows in holiness through that obedience. Even more when it's a silly, foolish thing, I think, in some ways. Now, what I've seen this, we sort of joke about it, but I've seen this, like, people they're trying to find ways to just, like, get around this obedience. And I think I have a hard time being sold on the idea that wearing masks is intrinsically evil. I don't think it is. But now people are starting to kind of develop this, like, theology of the face, which is like,
That's
it's like a
interesting.
subsection of the theology of the body where like, if you don't see a human being's face, like what, and I'm like, I get it. I mean, the face is important, but it's not like I don't see faces at all. I'm like, I go home and I look at my wife's face. I stare at my kids' faces. It's not like I'm not seeing faces at Kroger. And
but what would you say in regards to the whole like? Well, I mean, there's a couple things we could talk about the masks all day long, but to kind of like revert it just slightly is like, what would you say about the whole like wearing masks and like is living out of fear and like just that whole thing about like living out of fear? Because like I mean, I would definitely agree with what you're saying with like the mask without going too deep into it. That like it's good to be obedient, but it's like. But there's also just a lot that goes into it that like, okay, yeah, it is foolish because you touch your face 20 times more than you do without the mask, you know? And it's like, I guess it would be interesting to see its debate if we talk about like, you know, what that level of like grave matter it is, you know, if it's actually putting more people in danger of getting sick because, you know, of all of this stuff, or if it's actually just like, okay, just obey kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, I guess going back to my question is like, what would you say in regards to like people wearing a mask?
Yeah. Living out of fear.
Yeah.
That's a great question because I think it's funny. All the folks who have told me this, that if you're wearing a mask, you're living in fear, are the same people who are so afraid that if they wearing masks is the government trying to overreach, because if you wear a mask, it's the government's first step in mandating behavior out of you that, you know, when you concede to wearing a mask, next thing you know, and now that they got you on the mask, and so what's strange to me is like the very thing that they're sort of leveling against mask wearers, which is you're living in fear, seems to be like true in equal measure of them, because they view masks as such a government overreach that next thing you know, we're going to be living in communist China. Like I saw on Facebook, this was great. Somebody wrote, next up, concentration camps for conservatives. And I'm like, no, that's fear, right? Yeah. So you're looking at me saying you're wearing the mask, you're afraid. And I'm looking at you going,
you're also afraid of something.
You're not wearing the mask because you're afraid that it means something. And so, I think this idea of like, I'll say this personally, I wear a mask wherever I'm asked to wear a mask. I can say with I don't even know how to like 99.9% certainty that I don't feel afraid of getting COVID. I'm young, I'm healthy. Now, are there these outlier cases where guys my age get it and die? There are, but they're real statistical outliers. I mean, but I wear a mask for a couple reasons. One is because we live in a town with a lot of elderly people, and I think it's a way to potentially mitigate the risk for them, even if it's not super effective, even if it's like minimally effective, it mitigates some risk. I don't find it so inconvenient that I'm unwilling to do that for someone.
People will say that the move from, okay, if you're not personally afraid of getting COVID, and you say, okay, I choose not to wear this because I'm not, but the idea with the mandate is you must wear it for other people. Even if you personally don't care about getting it. Like this idea of communal responsibility being mandated by the government, I think is what people mostly, because they're saying like, we're both young, more than likely not even going to get seriously ill with it.
Sure.
And so,
why should I have to care about someone else?
Well, I don't know if I'd put it exactly like that, but
smart. Yeah, smart.
Yeah, and people also debate like how the spreadability and other stuff, like it's not perfectly. So I think that's where their disagreement with the government mandate kind of stems from.
It's funny.
Is communal responsibility and how much can they step?
I'm out over my skis on this one already. But in some sense, I mean, it seems to me like laws are, at least sort of one of the traditional ways of viewing laws is that laws are intended to make men good. Laws are intended to sort of inculcate virtue in us. And there's a certain virtue in forcing us to think about the common good. There's something that when a law says, hey, think about the other person. Hey, think about the other, hey, think about, now maybe you could debate that this law doesn't do that, or these mandates don't do that, or that they go about it in the wrong way. But I do think there is a way you might say that the spirit of these mandates anyway could be construed, right? If the intention is sort of pure, they could be construed as inviting people to think about the common good. And the thing that we dislike about the common good, by the way, is that sometimes the common good requires me to sacrifice personal goods in pursuit of this more common good.
But do you think that people like giving, because like I don't know that much about politics. I don't know that much about just like people giving out laws and how this all works. But like, you know, I have to question though, like the people who are putting out these laws, especially like not trying to be super like, you know, because I am a conservative, obviously, right? And it's like, you know, not trying to be super down on like the Democrats or whatever else. But it's like, I have to think though that those people putting out those laws and stuff like that, are they really truly thinking about the common good, or are they just being like, oh, I have some power?
That's a reasonable question.
You know, because you know,
for sure,
I wonder if they're mean behind that law, for example, because at the end of the day, too, like, you know, and I'm sure we'd bring this up with the debate, you know, so we don't have as much time to talk about it now, but it's like with COVID and the results anyways, and like how much it's hyped up. And I think one of the questions you and I were talking about before that I'd love to hear too of your thoughts before, you know, we have to wrap this up is like, you know, it seems like so much of this stuff is hyped up almost too much, like whether it's through social media and the impact that has, because just how much of a control social media has on, I mean, because like, and I don't know how true this is because I'm not super up on top of statistics, but there was somebody who said that like more people die from diarrhea than they do from COVID, you know? And it's
suspect.
Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like people die. And if it happens to be by COVID, so what? You know, like my brother from my net team passed away and we thought that it was probably from COVID. And like, I still didn't process that, but it's like, I don't care that he died from COVID. If that was the case, I care about the fact that he passed away.
Right.
You know? And so it's like,
what if it was I mean, I guess, that's where it gets into like, to what degree is it sort of preventable based on our actions and behavior? I mean, that's where I would, it's like, well, people die by drunk driving, you know, like, I don't care that they died by drunk driving. I care that they died. Well, I do care that they died by drunk driving because there are ways to sort of prevent that from happening. Like if my son was killed by a drunk driver, I'd feel some sort of way about it because people could take measures to avoid that. And I think they're reasonable measures to ask people to take to avoid that. The question is, does COVID fall into that camp? Does COVID fall into the it's okay to expect or to ask us to do these things in order to mitigate the risk to people? Now, again, I don't know. I've heard people say like it's just people that take this really seriously are afraid of dying. It's a lack of faith to sort of I don't know how true this, it seems overblown to me. It seems like, you know, I do whatever I can to, even if I have the flu, I don't go around my grandmother. She's 83. I don't go around my grandmother with the flu. Even if that means I have to stay home or stay in Steubenville and not visit her and sort of be miserable here, but it's because I love her. I don't want to get her sick. I don't want to, how much should I be? Here's what I think the conference this weekend's on that I think this is a really interesting question. I don't have answers for it. There's much smarter people, much more informed people than I thinking about this. But how much does American liberalism, right? The American founding and the principles that America is founded on, how much does American liberalism radically shape the way we see and practice our Catholicism? Like without a...
That'll be our third podcast.
Yeah. I mean, you need get one of the guys this weekend at the conference to come on, man, because they're the... But it's my glasses. When I wear my glasses, right, I don't remember that I'm wearing my glasses. I just see the world through them, and the world is clear and it's night, right? I don't notice they're on my face. It's when I take them off that I'm like, oh wow, right? I think the problem with American with the American liberalism is it's so we're in it. We are in it. It's a fish in water, right?
Yeah.
But I think it shapes the way, it alters the way we receive the doctrines of the faith. About
scary thought.
Wow. No, I think it does. Like how we think about one another. I mean, look, one of the principles of American liberalism is like individual rights. These individual rights, and I think in some ways this cuts. While Catholic social teaching recognizes the dignity of the individual human person and a certain autonomy and freedom, right, of free will and agency that people have, I don't think you'll find in Catholic social teaching anything like the radical elevation of individual rights that you see in American liberalism. And that means that when something rubs me the wrong way, how dare somebody tell me to, how dare they? But the question is that, what is this? Is this something in American liberalism that has shaped me and is causing me to have a hard time growing spiritually because it's not jiving well with a sort of spiritual principle that should be at play in my life.
Yeah, but to kind of go off of that, because also I don't know how much time we have, but it's like, I'm still curious. It's like, it's just, you can't go one single day without somebody talking about COVID.
No, I know.
You know, it's just like, and it's just like, again,
No,
like
you're
the whole
right.
thing about like diarrhea. Like
Yeah.
could, there's more people, if that's an actual statistic, and using that as an example, not to be weird, but it's like,
it's weird.
Then why are we every day talking about diarrhea?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, or like the drunk driving,
Yeah,
or like the fact that we have all these high depression rates.
Yeah,
It's like, why aren't we talking about that? And that's again like why. And like I don't know how much time we have, but I'm really curious about just that.
We got 5 minutes.
Okay.
We're good.
Yeah. So I'm just really curious in regards to like the social media thing and the impact that has.
For sure.
Like mentally wise, because I mean like. And another thing I wanted to bring up too is just like there's been such a rise of suicides. There's been such a rise of like depression rates because people have felt more isolated.
No, for sure.
And whatever. And then like the whole quarantine thing, or just like you know back at home and the toxic family life that can be back there. It's like I guess my original questions beforehand was just like, what for one thing, is COVID big enough to where it needs to impact the entire country and every single person in what they do? Or can we just have our own personal choice of being like, okay, for example, like you said, if you have the flu, I'm not going to go see my grandma. That's just something we should just common sense know. And not be forced to be like, everyone has to wear masks, everyone has to do this, social, all this crap. Make your own smart damn choices. You know? But it's like, but then,
it's American liberalism.
So what are your thoughts in regards to like whether it's the social media or just how much we are giving attention to this? Is it worth it to put everybody?
Okay.
So
I think I'm going to dodge part of the question, but I'll answer part of it. So to the first part of the question, I think you're right that look, it seems undoubtedly true to me that mainstream media controls huge swaths of the narrative that we hear, right? That the news sources we go to shape in a significant way how we think about ourselves, others, in the world. They tell stories. Look, whether you like Donald Trump or hated Donald Trump's the mainstream media's fascination with him. There was not a single day in his 4 years that you turned on the TV that somebody wasn't discussing Donald Trump. I mean, it was unbelievable. Now, do I think he's beyond reproach? Absolutely not. But as if like nothing was happening in Syria or Russia or Lebanon or it was they kept it in our cultural mind. That's true. All of the time. So to your point, we are radically shaped by like these narratives that the mainstream media crafts, but also by Facebook and Snapchat, or anything that has ads or these algorithms that put in front of us. I mean, The Social Dilemma is a fantastic documentary on Netflix. Fantastic. But that you're essentially, what brings you back to Facebook isn't that it's this toxic place where you have to argue with people all the time. It's that it's an echo chamber where what you say is repeated back to you, and it feels good to have a whole bunch of people that think like you. The algorithms of Facebook have essentially radically separated us by these ideological lines, or according to these ideological lines, and they keep us seeing only what we want to see. That's hugely problematic. It's hugely problematic because we're not getting other sides of the story. So Democrats aren't getting sort of conservative sides of the story. Conservatives aren't getting Republican side of the story, or Democrat side of the story. We're not getting the whole picture. So do I think that coronavirus has absolutely been co-opted by mainstream media and Facebook, and that there's a narrative that's being told? I do. I think it's it's complex, and I think that that it's hard to wade through that stuff because it's like drinking out of a fire hydrant. But you're right to note that it is huge. It has utterly dominated the news cycle for a year. And I think what we have to be sort of, look, to your question is, or maybe here's where I want to maybe end, is something like this. A big part of the problem with all of this is how it's fractured us in terms of how we dialogue with one another. I mean, this is one of the big the fact that this has been politicized and then taken up by religious people along political lines, and masks has been made proxies for it. It's prevented us from being able to actually have certain discussions with people because the other is the enemy. And so to get to a place where we can even think about this stuff or talk about this. What would it look like to maybe have policies in place that are less restrictive, that still safeguard the vulnerable, and even maybe ask us to make sacrifices for the vulnerable? Like, that shouldn't be abhorrent to a Catholic. You know, I love when college students, you know, I have these students who are like, Dr. B, I'm doing Exodus 90. I'm taking cold showers every day. I'm not drinking beer. And they're like, oh, I can't put a mask on. That just like too annoying. Like, it impedes my, it's too, I'm like, hold up. Like, so look, I'm not arguing that we should be comfortable all the time. We may need to make sacrifices for the vulnerable, but we can't even have a conversation of what that would look like. How can we maybe make certain sacrifices while being less restrictive in some ways in order to help aid the mental health of people that are not at risk? By the way, your age group is the group that's most at risk for a mental health issue as a result of COVID. Oh, definitely. Right? You guys are going to suffer the most in terms of mental health issues. You guys are also the ones who are less likely to die from it. To get it, yeah. Right? So how can we maybe think about this in a way that's still respects the vulnerable? Doesn't just say, I've heard friends of mine have been like, well, look, they can just isolate themselves and we can go about our lives. Well, that sucks. Like, look, when I'm 83, I hope nobody talks to me like that. Well, buddy, your life's over. Like, let the young live. I'm like, what? That's terrible. That's just, I don't know. That's such a shallow view of like, of the elder. That is the culture of death. You want to ask what JP2's culture of death is when we look at the unborn and the elderly as these sort of throwaway items. So we shouldn't do that, but we should maybe find a way of thinking about this differently. But we can't even have those conversations because, and this is disappointing to see in Catholic circles, because it's become so polarized that we've lost charity, and both sides have become, this is the word that comes to mind every time I see debates on Facebook, self-righteous. Both sides have
moral
become
grandstanding on both
moral
sides.
grandstanding.
To wrap it up, what do you think 2020 is over. We're in 2021. What do you think the long-term, are we going to come out of the mask wearing, social distancing to something else? Is this kind of realm here to stay? No. Are these mental issues that came from the pandemic? What's that long-term impact look?
So like if anyone actually thought I knew this, I'd probably be making a ton of money.
But I want you to tell the future, Dr. B.
Gosh, if anyone with power is listening. But so here's what I think, and maybe this is the optimist in me, but I generally think that by the end of the summer, I think that by July and August, I think the masks are going to be gone. I think the most of the social distancing requirements are going to be gone. I think by the end of this summer, July, August, life is going to be relatively back to normal. I think that's a result probably of rapidly declining numbers in most states and what appears to be the efficacy of most of the vaccines. Yeah. So I think by the end of the summer, life's going to be back to relative normal. We can hope. That's my guess. Yeah.
We can really hope.
Looking
forward to
that.
This
is the downside, though. The downside is I think you're going to see the mental health issues are still going to continue to rise and haven't yet peaked. I think the problem is there's going to be a lag in watching how these mental health issues unfold as people come back out, as people are forced to go back to work. Look, I mean, you're isolated from your job, you're feeling depressed, but getting back to work is going to be hard too. Going back and being around a ton of people, the stress of the job, that you're going to see, I think, this sort of lag in mental health issues. And so I think we'll see the effects of the mental health dimension of this for years. I think this is a wave that's going to ride up on the beach, and it's going to take a while to recede. And so that's where I think you're going to see life go back to normal in many ways, but a lot of people I think are going to be sort of limping along in terms of mental health because of this.
And we'll be figuring out what all those problems were as they come up.
I think so. Like you're saying, like not knowing, like pinpointing the cause, that kind of thing. Like it'll be a while for them to figure out, like, what are those causes? Because like you were saying, nobody wants to talk about it.
Nobody wants to talk about it.
Except for us on the Kellen and Alex show. Boom. Thanks for coming back on.
Welcome. Thanks
what a blast. Hope to have you again. Third time would be awesome. And that's going to wrap it up for us. Kellen and Alex show. Thanks so much for coming on. Peace out.
Thanks for having me.
If there's a Christian religion, then it's Catholicism or nothing.
What politics actually is art of people living together, orienting one another towards virtue.
And the person was like, dude, flirting is the abortion of love. This is the most worthy, most exciting, most adventurous.
Drop a nuke on the Franciscan bubble.
The Kellen and Alex Show. all sound theology. God could have stopped it if he wanted.
Permissive will.
That's facts.
I don't know why God would allow something like that to go through, but then again, God allows
you to go on and on.
Fair enough.
Truth, okay.